Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christie, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. We have a great guest today in Kyle Young. Kyle is so many wonderful things. He is an author. He is a success habit creator. He's also a strategy consultant, an award-winning one. He's a speaker. He's a dad. He loves to fish. He's been married for 13 years, and he and his wife love to go to musicals together. They're also big Disney fans, and right now, as we're recording this, a big storm's coming through, and he's thinking about driving through the night. I don't know if he's decided to do that or not, and he loves to travel. And today, he's our guest on Productive Joy. Welcome, Kyle.
Do you know, on the off chance that my wife listens to this, I'm going to publish a correction. I think I've been married for 12 years.
Oh my gosh. Okay,
I got
really
married January 2nd, 2014. Don't edit it. I take responsibility for the mistake. I did say 13. I got married January 2nd, 2014. So that would be 12 years. So
Oh my goodness.
12, 13, somewhere in that range. But
well, and you were about to have an anniversary. So happy anniversary.
Just did.
Yeah, you just did. Right.
Yeah, no, thank you. But I want to get that right. It'll keep me out of trouble.
You know what? That makes you a good husband. So well done. Well done. Well, welcome today. And I am so excited for our guests that are listening to get to hear you and all of the fabulous things that you have to say. And people have a short attention span. So what would you say to them in like 30 seconds or less that would make them go, oh my gosh, yes, this episode's for me?
Well, what I believe is that every goal that you're pursuing has two hidden numbers attached to it. There's a probability of success and a probability of failure. And what I do as a consultant and through my book is I try to help people understand how likely they are to accomplish the goals that they're considering. But more importantly, I try to teach people how to change their odds, because if we can tilt the odds in your favor, you're going to win more, lose less, and get more of what you want in life.
Well, that was very well said, and probably something everybody that's listening needs to know more about. So how did you land here? Because I'm going to guess you didn't go to high school and say, you know what I want to be? I want to be like a success coach that looks at the odds of failure. It's like those weren't the things that you thought about. So how did you get here?
Yeah, that's actually a point of frustration for me is when you look at the math that all of us are required to take. Most of us have taken a class about, maybe trigonometry. Trigonometry is really only used in engineering, architecture, some pretty specific disciplines, and yet we all have to take classes like that. Our odds of success affect everything we do every day, and it's a universal reality that every single one of us experiences. And most of us have never learned about it in high school, exactly like you said. So I am no exception to that. You asked, how did I end up here? I got here through something that at the time I was really frustrated about, which is I was laid off twice from different leadership positions, 13 months apart. So early in my career, lost two great jobs, at least on paper. The first time my wife and I had just bought our first house, so not a time when I wanted to lose a job. The second time we were in the process of growing our family through adoption, which is pretty famously expensive. Also not a great time to lose my job. So after that, I found myself in a position where I just lost two jobs back to back. I could go try to find another one, but leadership positions, don't grow on trees. And then I would always live with the fear that I was just going to be laid off again. So I was really fortunate that people knew of my work, respected what I did, and I actually had 4 job offers the day after that second layoff. And so one of the decisions I made, I got some advice from friends, and they said, why don't you accept fractional roles with more than one company? Why don't you consult, diversify your income, and maybe reduce your risk of getting laid off again? So I took that advice, but one of the things that getting laid off twice taught me was it's not just about my individual performance. It's not just about showing up, working hard, having integrity. To some extent, if these projects weren't succeeding, it wasn't going to matter how much people liked me. They had to have the money to pay me. So I entered into consulting with really this, I guess you would call it, this focus on what can I do to try to make my clients successful, not just when it comes to what I've been hired to do, not just when it comes to my job description, but what can I do to take some ownership for the outcomes of these projects? And that forced me to pay attention to the odds of success that my clients had and ultimately to try to find ways to change them. So that's more or less how I got into this line of work.
That is a pretty fascinating story. And I'm guessing you always had a little bit of, I don't know if I want to say stick-to-itiveness or adventure spirit of I can do things that look a little different than what everybody else is doing. Is that true? Or was that by circumstances?
Yes and no. I think that I always had a curiosity about what would it look like to take a different path, but it took 2 layoffs to get me on that different path. So I without those, I think it's possible my life would have looked different.
So the people who listen to this kind of range from my own kids when I can get them to listen, they're 24, to, business people somewhere in the range of like 30 to 60, and they are leading others. Based on your experience, based on the 2 layoffs, based on what you know to be true and have written a book about, what advice would you have for that range of human that might help them have a propensity towards the successes rather than the failures?
Sure. Well, I encourage people to do what I call creating a success diagram. And what a success diagram is, it's very simple. You write down on a piece of paper, normally the top right, what you want to accomplish. What is the specific goal? And then to the left of that, you list out, left to right, each of the things that's going to have to go right in order for you to get the outcome you want. So you now have a path of if these things go right, all of them, then I'm going to get the outcome that I want. What you do at that point is for everything that has to go right, you do some brainstorming about what could go wrong. And this is something that's pretty counterintuitive. When most of us are pursuing a big goal, people tell us to think positive. They say, don't worry about what could go wrong. You'll just discourage yourself. You need to manifest the outcome that you want. And I recommend the opposite. I actually encourage people to think negative. For everything that has to go right, I encourage them to brainstorm what are the things that could happen instead of what I need to happen. Because ultimately, we can think about probabilities similar to how we think maybe about matter, the idea that matter can't be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred and rearranged. And the same thing is true with our odds of success. If we're going to flip a coin, and if it lands on heads, I win the game, I have a 50% chance of winning. Well, why only 50%? Because there's also a 50% chance it could land on tails. Now, I don't know how to make a coin less likely to land on tails, but in the context of our goals, we often can do that. Let's say I'm training to run a marathon, which you mentioned that we're kind of Disney fans. I'm running a half marathon in the end of February at Disney,
Nice.
but for the hypothetical, I'm going to make myself sound more impressive. Let's say I'm training to run a full marathon, and I hire a running coach. And she says, there's 3 things you have to do in order to get ready for this. I'm going to need you to eat, sleep, and train according to the regimens I'm going to give you. And if you do that, you stick with it, you'll be ready on race day. But if you don't, if you only do 2 of the 3 things or 1 of the 3 things, or if you cheat across the board, then you're not going to be ready on race day. You're not going to be able to run such a long distance. So in this diagram, there's 3 things that have to go right. I have to eat, sleep, and train if I want to accomplish the goal of running a marathon. So if we're thinking negative, we ask ourselves, what are some things that might keep me from sticking with this training regimen? Let's pick that prerequisite. Maybe some inclement weather. You mentioned that we have a big storm coming, and that could be something that might make it difficult to run. If there's ice on the roads for a week, how is that going to work?
Right.
Well, as I think about that risk that I've identified, now I get to use my creativity to try to solve it. And I can put myself in a position where I realize maybe I need to have a treadmill so that I can run indoors, or find some exercises that'll work some of the same muscles, even if I can't get outside for a period of time. And what we're doing is we're systematically de-risking our goals. For every bad outcome that we've identified, we're trying to make it less likely. And when we do that, we can make the outcomes we want more likely. And I'll show you why this is really important with some made-up numbers. In this analogy, we need to eat, sleep, and train. So let's estimate how likely we think I am to stick with each of those 3 things. Let's just say it's 70% across the board. We think there's a 70% chance I'll eat the way I'm supposed to, a 70% chance I'll sleep the way I'm supposed to, a 70% chance I'll train the way I'm supposed to. Many people would feel very good about those numbers. A lot of us fall into a trap called averaging, where if we feel good about the individual steps, we feel good about the goal as a whole. But that's actually, as crazy as it sounds, that's not mathematically sound. If we want to know what my odds are of running the marathon, we have to multiply those 3 numbers together. We have to multiply 0.7 times 0.7 times 0.7. And if we do, what we learn is I only have a 34% chance of being ready on race day. Even though we feel good about these things individually, the odds are I'm going to slip up in one of those 3 areas. We don't know which one, but this is a predicted failure. So we have to be intentional about understanding what are the things that could go wrong, because those are hogging the odds that we want. And if we go take the risk out of those bad outcomes, again, we can change our odds, change our outcomes, and ultimately change our lives.
What I hear there is that knowledge is power, right? Like if we're going to, knowing is half the battle, G.I. Joe it. You're not old enough, but I am. Remember that reference. But what I'm hearing is knowing is step 1, but then you have to do something about what you know, right? And I talk a lot about the knowing doing gap, and the fact that that's often more like a chasm, right? To get somebody, I know better. I know I should eat right. I know I should sleep. I know I should train. But to do it when it's cold outside or whatever, that's when it becomes difficult. You have a clear path for helping people understand the difference between the 2, but do you have a magic wand that helps them leap the gap?
In terms of turning knowledge into action? Is that what you mean by that? Well, again, to some extent, I think that we have an opportunity to even hack the risk of a lack of motivation. If I'm concerned in the context of running a marathon that I'm not going to stick with my training regimen, that it's going to be due to a lack of motivation, what can I do about that? Do I have an opportunity to find a running partner who might go with me and create some accountability. But what I find is one of the biggest reasons that people aren't taking action in their lives is there is this fear of failure that a lot of times comes from, again, the unwillingness to think negative. They know that there are threats to their success. They know that this might not go the way they want to, but for some reason they don't feel empowered to try to identify the specific risks and do something about it. And in my experience, when you embrace, or at least maybe not embrace, but when you face the fear and acknowledge there are some potential bad outcomes, here's what they are, and then you start to brainstorm, here's what I can do about them, you do experience a surge of motivation. And I don't find it to be, I find that when you do this work and you watch your odds improve, all of a sudden you're filled with a confidence that you might not have otherwise. And a lot of times it's kind of an antidote to self-doubt. I think when most people think about self-doubt, they focus on self. They have this sense that maybe I'm inadequate, so they try to think about these positive, affirming thoughts about themselves. That's fine, but I think another way to address self-doubt is just to look at your odds of success and make it less about self. All of a sudden, when it comes to running this marathon, eat, sleep, train, that's not really about me. That's more just a reflection of the risks of bad weather or the risk of an injury or the risk of, something happening in my kids' lives and it swamps my schedule. There are things I can do about all of that. I can make intentional choices to respond to each of those different risks. And I think that's more effective than me just telling myself over and over that I'm special.
Yeah. And you know what? This is fascinating to me. And I love that you have written a book about it, because I'm going to guess that people don't get undivided time with you, but now they can pick up this book and they can learn these things, and then they can ask you some questions afterwards. So why don't we give everybody the title and then tell us what your impetus was for putting all of this on paper?
Yeah, I think you've set me up well there. The book is called Success is a Numbers Game, Achieve Bigger Goals by Changing the Odds. And the impetus was, in many ways, what you described, which is that I do work with some people one-on-one. I always have a list of retainers, different organizations, and some individuals as well. But I find myself in a position where I have to say no more than I say yes. And I started writing for sites like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Psychology Today, Fast Company, in large part because it gave me the ability to respond to questions I would get from people that I maybe couldn't, actually take on an engagement with. So someone would ask me a question about, say, differentiation, and I'd say, great, here's an article from one of those major websites that'll help you think that through, and this is more or less what I would tell you if we could meet in person. But I didn't have anything more comprehensive. I didn't have anything that really told the big picture of how I view success and how I approach consulting contracts and how someone else could take that framework and use it in their own lives. So when I was given the opportunity to release a book, with a big publishing house, it was a chance to take 60,000 words instead of maybe 600 and really tell the story of how I view success. And so I was able to dive into 4 different paths to success, all having to do with probability. I was able to talk about, how does that impact our decision to quit or keep going? How does that impact our decision making? How does that work in highly competitive goals? And it was an opportunity to write something more comprehensive. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. And I have no doubt that it would be clear, usable, right away, applicable, because the hardest part about this stuff is simple doesn't mean easy, right? But sometimes things are so far above people's heads that they can't break it down into step one, right? Like, what's step one? And it's clear to me, your steps, and those steps are repeatable. And there's something, I've got pictures drawn on my page just from your visuals that you were describing. And the other thing that I see about you, Kyle, is you're very solutions oriented. You're not going to let whatever those odds are stop you. You're going to dig a little deeper into those odds and turn them into something that works in your favor. Is that first of all accurate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It always, breaks my heart when I encounter somebody who maybe hears something like that marathon example, that you can have 3 things that have to go right. Each of them have a 70% chance, and that translates to 34% overall. And sometimes the response I get is, well, then what's the point? And that's not at all what we're trying to do here. What I'm trying to illustrate is if you aren't being intentional about really optimizing your odds of success, then you're going to be one of the millions of frustrated people in the world who don't understand why they can never accomplish a New Year's resolution, who don't understand why, supposedly 9 out of 10 businesses fail, or the majority of mergers and acquisitions fail to create lasting value for shareholders. Why do we see so much ineffectiveness and dysfunction in our world? I think a lot of it stems from a lack of understanding that we have to take our odds very seriously. But once we've made that leap, then I think it becomes a lot of fun to identify the things that could go wrong and use our creativity to solve them. If you're open to it, I'll give you an example that has no numbers, but I'll tell you about a time when I used this in my own life, and it was really transformative. Do we have time for that?
Absolutely. Go.
So when I graduated college, this was roughly 15 years ago, but when I had first graduated college, I wasn't super inspired by some of the entry-level positions I was seeing. So I decided to do something really audacious. I applied to be the product development director at a health organization. I was 21 years old, and if I got this job, I was going to be managing people who were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Some of them had PhDs, some of them had master's degrees. These were specialists, and I was going to be their boss at 21. So that's obviously a pretty audacious goal. I'm almost surprised that I did it, but I decided I was going to try, and I was given an interview. And so that meant there was only one more thing that had to go right. I just needed a job offer, and I would have everything that I was hoping to get out of this. So even back then, long before I started consulting, I understood to some extent intuitively that I had an opportunity to improve my odds of success by thinking about what could go wrong. And so I identified three potential bad outcomes, three things that could happen instead of what I wanted, which was to get that job offer. One of them was they might not offer me the job because of how young I looked. They might take one look at me and decide he can't do this. So very strategically, but also very easily, I grew a beard, and it gave me the chance to look about 10 years older than I was. And it took some of the edge off of that concern. It didn't eliminate the risk, but it made it a lot less likely to be something that sabotaged me. A second risk that I identified was they might not want to hire me because of my lack of experience. They might be worried that I didn't have enough experience. And that was a reasonable concern because I was fresh out of college. I didn't have much of a resume. I couldn't conjure up experience overnight, and I wasn't going to lie, but I did have the opportunity to try to redirect the conversations I was going to be having. So I actually typed up a plan for how I was going to turn this department around, how I was going to make it more effective. And it was so comprehensive that I had to spiral bound it. It was a book.
Oh
And I
my.
took that with me. And whenever they would ask a question about my resume or, just the gaps in my experience, I would just redirect the conversation to say, great question. Well, here's my plan for how I'm going to turn the department around. And it gave me good answers and good things to talk about despite a pretty limited resume. The third and final risk that I identified was maybe they'd be worried I couldn't fit in with the team just because of a generational gap. Maybe they thought, oh, he's not going to be able to get along with the people that he's managing. So I used a trick that I've found to be really effective over the course of my career when you're trying to build a new relationship, earn some trust. I asked an existing team member if they'd read any books as a group lately, and she named a few titles. And so I went out and I read all of them in preparation for some of the interviews I was going to be doing. And when I showed up, I had the ability to understand the company's jargon. I knew their goals. I knew the things that they were considering. I could make inside jokes because we'd all read the same books. And I found myself in a group interview. It was me and people who were 20, 30 years older than I was interviewing for this job, and they had so much more experience than I did. And one of the books that we'd read, or that they had read and that I read too, was called The Wuffy Factor. Not a lot of people talk about the Wuffy Factor anymore, but this was around 15 years ago. And it was a book about how brands can earn social capital. And one of the ideas that was presented, we were reacting to it, and I said, I think this is something that could get us a lot of wuffy. And I remember looking around the room, and these other applicants, their eyes were bugging out of their heads. What on earth did he just say? What is wuffy? What is he talking about? But then I looked at the existing team members, and they were all laughing and nodding along because, again, we had a shared context. So ultimately, I was 21 years old. I applied to be the product development director at a health organization, and I got that job. I
Well
met this
done.
who had so much more experience than I did. I would ultimately be laid off from that job when funding changed for the organization, but I still got great performance reviews. That job led to another job, and that job led to my consulting career. So that's just an example of how you don't have to have some deep understanding of math to think negative, identify the risks in our lives, and then use your creativity or collaborate with other people, take advantage of their creativity to change your odds of success.
That is just downright impressive, Kyle. And I am going to guess that talent that you have has served you really, really well in life. I would even argue that maybe that's created some productive joy for you in this consulting space. And so that leads me to my favorite question, because the reality is everybody gets to define productive joy for yourself. So if you had to define it right now, today, this day, what would be your definition of productive joy?
Well, to some extent, I think it means that I'm doing things that I want to be doing. And, if I'm not doing anything, then that's not productive. And if I'm not enjoying it, then that's not joy. And for me, what I found is that problem solving was something that always was really energizing for me. And that's what, again, put me in a position to succeed as a consultant was I was able to find that common denominator. Ultimately, even if I was working with one person who was a psychologist and one person who was a nutritionist and one person who had a nonprofit digging wells for people who didn't have access to clean water, and that I could make that list go on for quite a while, the common denominator was ultimately I was there to solve problems. I was there to figure out what is your goal, what's it going to take to help you get it, and what are the things that might be currently weighing down your odds of success. And so once I had that framework in mind, I was able to have a lot more productive joy, because I think one of the biggest things that keeps us from being able to experience what you're talking about is sometimes ambiguity. We want to do something. There's this angst, but we aren't really sure how to enter into it. And so for me, that clarity is what allowed me to have the career that I've had. But I think a success diagram is what allows us to have that in the context of our goals. If we
Yeah.
aren't sure what we should be working on today, let's identify what's the goal, what's going to have to go right, what could go wrong. And I think we'll pretty quickly see a to-do list start to materialize.
Do you do that daily? Do you do the to-do list of what are my goals for today and what do I need to have in order for those to be successful? Or is it more of a weekly, monthly, big project thing?
Well, when you have a success diagram, the nice thing is you can carry that with you for however long the goal lasts. So I think about even the goal of writing this book. This was something I wanted to do for decades, but I didn't really put it at the front of my to-do list for a long time because I knew how bad my odds were. First, I needed to go develop a platform. I needed to write for sites like HBR and Forbes and Psychology Today, or at least I knew that would be helpful. I needed some relationships with literary agents. And so I had opportunities to take on contracts that would put me in the room with those people over the years. And I always said yes because I knew that this was a goal of mine. I was going to need to have a methodology. And so as I had more and more success in consulting, I had to find ways to formalize that so that I could share it in a book. It wasn't just me, thinking on my feet every time. So ultimately, that diagram, that vision that I had for this goal was something that stuck with me for a couple of decades. And then eventually I said, I think it's time to pull the trigger. And when I did, I was able to get a book deal pretty quickly and really without that much stress because of the work that I had done leading up to that. So I don't necessarily sit down every day and, try to make a to-do list based on my diagram. The great thing is when you have that understanding of the goal in your head or on a sheet of paper, you can take it with you throughout your life and accomplish a lot. And it doesn't always even feel like you're working that hard.
No, and it is clear that you're a pretty smart dude who has taken all of
Nice.
your life experiences and you put them together into something that's repeatable, that's a true system, that is something that you can do either on paper or mentally at any given time. And that is a gift. I don't know if you realize what a gift that is, but to be able to articulate this big picture idea, this thing that seems so nebulous, and turn it into something that other people can not just understand but actually be able to utilize is a really exceptional and special thing. So I don't know if people tell you that often enough. So let me tell you that that's impressive.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. Like I said, it really does bother me that so many of us are taking classes in really specialized areas of mathematics that probably won't affect our careers. And then we get almost no training when it comes to understanding how life and uncertainty are going to impact our lives. And
Yeah.
we see this across all kinds of disciplines. One of the things I talk about in the book is just the power of multiple attempts. If you're pursuing an unlikely goal, maybe a 1% chance of success, a lot of people wouldn't even attempt that. But what we don't realize is in some cases, 1% isn't your chance of achieving success at all. It's just your odds of succeeding with your first attempt.
Mhm.
And if you were to try 100 times, we would now predict you to have one success. And when we look at all these different disciplines, one of them being the arts, we realize that this is an explanation for some of the most successful careers in history. We think about Mozart or we think about Beethoven. Maybe a few pieces of classical music. I could probably identify, I don't know, 5 or 10, not that many. What a lot of people were surprised to learn is that Mozart composed over 600 pieces of music,
Mm.
Beethoven over 700. Van Gogh painted and sketched so prolifically, he averaged roughly one new work of art every 36 hours for 10 years. And when we
Wow.
realize how productive these people were, certainly finding joy in their craft, we start to understand that that played a role in allowing them to produce 5, 10, 15 works of art that stood the test of time.
Such a good reminder. It's kind of that consistency theory, right? Like you just have to continue to be consistent with the thing that you want more of. You are episode number, I think, 260 or so of Productive Joy. And it has been exactly what you're saying, something that, okay, 5 people listen to this one, yay. 55 people listen to this one, yay, right? Like celebrating those moments, but just being willing to continue is one of those lost arts, I think, especially in today's world where everything is instant, right? You get 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention and they're going to scroll past you and they're, all of the instant gratification that we've been experiencing. And we've got to shift from that, don't we? Otherwise, we're going to end up missing our multiple attempts and miss out on something fantastic.
Sure, because in your case, what does it take maybe for an episode to go viral? Well, to some extent, it's probably going to take someone sharing it who has a big following, and they're going to have to really resonate with the topic, maybe really resonate with the guest. And that's something that's going to be difficult for you to control. You
Right.
can't necessarily understand, divine, and just force that to happen. But what can you do? You can do exactly what you've done. You can release 260 episodes, and give yourselves 260 chances for somebody to really resonate with an episode and say, I've got to share this. And
Yeah.
if that's the right person, it could be the thing that is a watershed moment that leads new people to discover the podcast. Some of them stick around, and you ultimately end up with that. So yeah, what we're trying to do is acknowledge that we don't control everything in our lives, but also find a middle ground. It's not fatalism. There are things we can do to put ourselves in a stronger position. We can
Right.
probability hack like we did with the marathon and try to change our odds. And we can be mindful of the fact that we have an opportunity through repeated attempts to sometimes, play the odds. We don't always have to beat the odds. Sometimes we can just play them.
Right. I mean, I grew up in Vegas and you played the odds. Right? Like
That's right. You did. I have
those are-
a blackjack story in the book. I got to interview a dealer at one of the major casinos there, and it's fascinating what they do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Kyle, you are fascinating, and I could talk to you all day, but I also know that people have a short attention span. We already talked about that. So,
That's right.
can I ask you some rapid fire questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Get comfortable. I'm
All
ready.
right. Before I ask, how would people find you? I know you mentioned the name of your book, but you include your middle name so that people can find you because Kyle Young, I'm guessing, is a little more common than you might think.
Yeah, that's a good guess. Yeah, Kyle Young. My goodness, there was a basketball player, the director of the Country Music Hall of Fame, and somebody who actually went to jail for a long period of time, and it's not me.
Excellent.
So
That's
I have a
exciting.
Google alert set up for my name, and I'm always shocked to learn what my fellow Kyle Youngs are up to. It's usually not what I'm up to, but Kyle Austin Young. You can buy the book Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, directly on the Penguin Random House website. So would love for you to do that. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Kyle Austin Young. Again, that makes me easy to find. That's been kind of one of the hidden blessings of this whole journey has been I'll log into LinkedIn, and it feels like every day I have somebody who's coming over from some interview or show that they heard me on with a question, and that's been a lot of fun. I have a website, I have all the things, but feel free to just find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect. Well, Kyle Austin Young, it is very nice to have you here. Okay, now are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, question number 1. What's your definition of fun?
Oh, goodness. To me, fun is feeling like I made progress toward a goal that was important to me. And that might be a goal in the context of my family or in my work, but if I'm making progress towards a goal, I usually feel pretty good.
And that could be going to Disney with your little and making memories, right? Like all of the above. Okay, love it.
Yeah,
How do you know that you're showing up as your authentic self?
Oh, goodness. I think in a lot of ways that just comes from checking in with my motivations. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And if I'm doing it because I recognize that the people I'm collaborating with are just as important as I am and I'm trying to serve them, or maybe because there's an audience of people, maybe customers or maybe a community that we're trying to reach. If we're all operating on an even playing field, then there's usually a lot of authenticity in that. It's when we try to be unequal and one person is important and the rest of the people are less important, and that's a game that we all slip into from time to time as humans, and maybe even more so as Americans. But if we check in and make sure we aren't playing the game, I think we're usually following a pretty good North Star.
That's a good answer. Good answer. How do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Well, again, for me, I think having a focus on your odds of success is important. And so to some extent, I can be in a bad mood and still be productive in pursuit of my most important goals. I think it's also important. This isn't by any means an insight of mine, but like one of the people I quote in the book is a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Ron Friedman. And one of the things that he preaches as a psychologist is understanding that our energy levels fluctuate throughout the day and can fluctuate day to day. But there's usually an energy level that's appropriate for just about every task. Or there's a way to make use of every energy level, might be a better way to say it. So you might be too tired to go on a podcast today and think on your feet and do rapid fire questions, but you might have a perfect amount of energy to get caught up on your inbox, right? So there's to some extent a realization that we don't have to be frustrated with ourselves, in the moments where our energy is dipping or when we're grumpy or whatever the case may be. What is the task that is appropriate for how I feel right now? And then go do it.
Kyle, I hope you know how exceptional you are, because that was just a perfect answer.
That's Dr. Ron Friedman's advice.
Well, okay. Thank you, Dr. Ron
Thankful to know
Friedman
about it.
also. Okay, last question. Tough question. What do you want people to remember about this podcast? Meaning, people will by nature remember one thing. So what's the one major idea that you want them to leave with today?
I think I want people to move away from just raw hope and into the understanding that you have a lot of agency in your life. I think that's what frustrates me the most is when I see people who have goals that they want to accomplish, but they feel like it's just all going to come down to luck, or they feel like it's all going to come down to how talented you are. And that's not true. In reality, there are, I talk about how in the book there's 4 paths to success, and some people do just get lucky. In the book, I tell the story of Norma Jean Dougherty. She's working at an aviation munitions factory during the war. A photographer comes to take pictures for a military magazine to inspire the troops. He says, "My goodness, you're so pretty. Can I take some pictures of you for other magazines?" And she says, "Yes." And then she ends up becoming this really famous actress under the stage name Marilyn Monroe. We look at that success story and we go, wow, that's pretty remarkable. But we wouldn't want to reverse engineer that, right? If I were to work with a client who says, I want to be a famous actress, I probably wouldn't tell her, well, we need to get you a factory job in hopes that a photographer stops by someday. That's not a reliable path to success. So we hear these really lucky success stories and we think it's all luck. Or we hear about people who were just so incredibly talented and we think, well, I don't have their talent. I could never accomplish this. But what we have to realize is that in most cases, it's just going to come down to our odds of success and that we have an opportunity to change those odds by identifying what could go wrong and using our creativity to take the risk out of those goals. And I find that that's an empowering way to pursue things that are important to us. It takes us off of center stage and ultimately puts us in a position where we can be more collaborative and more effective in what we do.
Very well said, my friend. Very well said. Well, listeners, if you haven't gathered something out of today, you weren't listening and you need to go back and listen again because Kyle has dropped gold all over the last 30 minutes. And I'm hopeful that you will grab one or two nuggets, whether that's just learning to be more solution-oriented or recognizing that your odds of success and failure can be predicted and you can lean into the things that you can influence. Maybe you can't control them, but you can certainly influence them. You can't change the weather, but you can decide what you're going to do in inclement weather if you're training for a marathon. And I know that you can take one of these things and use it right away so that you can do what I always challenge you to do, and that's figure out a way to turn fun into action.